The conifers, or coniferous trees. Often the first step in identifying a tree species is to observe its silhouette. There are, in fact, many different shapes of trees. In general, conifers have a well-known silhouette that differs from that of broadleaf trees. Observe the conifers in your area and determine what silhouette they have. Are they sphere or cone-shaped? So silhouette is the same word as form and shape. So when you're looking at the example, there's a drawing of a larch tree in your junior biologist, and it kind of has the shape of a pyramid. So when it asks you what the form of the tree you've drawn is, that's what it's looking for. Needles. Needles also come in different shapes and lengths and are very important in identifying conifer species. Furthermore, the way they are bundled together and their location on the twigs help distinguish different kinds of trees. Trees can often be correctly identified by observing their needles. Cones. The fruit of conifers contain the seeds for reproduction of the species. The trunk and branches are enveloped in a protective covering called bark. It serves the same function as skin does for humans. The fruit and bark are often used to help identify a tree. So sometimes the bark will be vertical, sometimes it will be very smooth, sometimes there will be spherical horizontal rings. They all look different. Okay, so conifer silhouettes. Did you know that it is possible to identify a tree simply by its silhouette? The silhouette is very important in dendrology, but it does take an expert eye to identify the exact species of a tree by its silhouette alone. Often you will need to observe the leaves, fruit, and bark to correctly identify a tree. Although conifers are generally all cone-shaped, there are differences between the species. How does the silhouette of a black spruce differ from that of a balsam fir? Do the eastern hemlock and eastern red cedar have the same silhouette? Are branches on the trunk of a lodgepole pine distributed in the same way as those on a white spruce? By asking yourself these kinds of questions, you will begin to see the different silhouettes. And it's a really good idea to start looking at the trees around and then maybe doing Google searches of different trees and starting to notice, what is a lodgepole pine? What does it look like? What is its shape? What kinds of needles does it have? That kind of thing. The black spruce, the narrowest conifer, resembles a cylinder more than a cone, whereas the white spruce is wider and is shaped more like a cone. The lodgepole pine and the balsam fir are both cone-shaped. However, the lodgepole pine does not have many branches near the base of the trunk, unlike the fir. Notice how the fir is tapered and pointed at the top. So we have a lot of lodgepole pine here, and many of them are used for building teepees because there aren't very many branches, so they're easy to get completely free of branches for teepee building. The Douglas fir is neither quite cone or cylinder shaped. Its silhouette is somewhat similar to that of the black spruce, but without branches at the base of the trunk. The larch has a lot fewer needles than other conifers. Moreover, this cone-shaped tree is the only conifer that loses its needles in winter, and you guys saw that example on October 5th when we did the guessing game. The branches of the eastern white pine branches are at right angles to the trunk, giving the tree the shape of a cylinder. The eastern red cedar has branches that shoot upwards, giving it a cone-shaped silhouette. The eastern hemlock has a distinctive silhouette. It becomes narrow towards the base, which makes it appear diamond-shaped. When observing trees outdoors, it is recommended that you look at a single isolated tree. This will enable you to observe the shape of its silhouette without interference from other trees. The shape of needles. Observing the needles on conifers is the most efficient means of identifying these trees. The shape and length of the needles are key to differentiating these species. You can determine the shape of a needle, i.e. whether it is four-sided, round, or flat, simply by rolling it between your thumb and index finger. Or you can cut the needle widthwise, that is, with your scissors at a right angle to the needle, and determine the shape of the cut edge. The illustrations will help you understand how to determine the shape of needles. So when you are describing the shape of your two needles that you drew, You should say whether they're four-sided, round, or flat. The needles of some conifers, such as the eastern white cedar and eastern red cedar, are made up of scales layered one on top of the other. Almost all conifers have evergreen needles that stay on the tree year-round. Only the larch, which has deciduous needles, is an exception to the rule. Conifers retain their green coats year-round, embellishing winter landscapes. Furthermore, this quality helps to significantly reduce wind speeds, much to the delight of those who love winter sports. So it helps ski hills, I guess. And then there are types of needle bundles. So when we see arrangement in the leaf drawings on our junior biologist, it's talking about the bundles, like are the needles coming in singles or doubles? How are they arranged on the branch? The pine family has needles that are grouped together in bundles consisting of 2, 3, or 5 needles joined together at the base. In other species, such as the larch, the bundles may consist of more than 5 needles. So you can see the bundles in the drawings here. Because the base of the needles or needle bundle in some species is covered in a very thin sheath, you should use a twig for identification, not just a single needle. You will therefore be able to properly observe how the needles or needle bundles are arranged. Conifers, such as firs and spruces, have single needles. The arrangement of needles. The way the needles are arranged on a twig is a key feature. Many conifers are characterized by this observation criteria. As you can see, needles are either arranged in bundles or singly placed on the twig. Identifying conifers with needles in bundles is easy to do. However, to identify conifers with single needles, you need to look at other features such as the way the needles are arranged on the twig. Needles may be arranged in pairs opposite each other. So remember, opposite, at the same position on the twig. These needles are said to be opposite needles. They can be observed on the eastern white cedar. When needles are placed around the twig at the same position, they are said to be alternate. So we had a picture of that earlier in one of the announcements pages where it was like showing what opposite and what alternating is. So take a look at the black spruce branch and check to see whether the needles alternate. Then try to find other species with alternating needles. If the needles are placed star-like around the twig at the same position, they are said to be whorled. So I think that was in the example diagram, that idea of whorled. Although you may occasionally see whorled needles on some junipers, in most cases, they are in opposite pairs. Needles are often arranged on one plane, not all around the twig. This occurs mainly when the needles are flat. You will see this feature if you look at the balsam fir branch that is here in the picture. The fruits of conifers. Conifers have 2 types of cones, pollen cones and seed cones. Depending on the tree species, you may find both types of cones on the same tree or on different trees. When seed and pollen cones are found on different trees, the species is called dioecious. Dioecious. Pollen cones are often smaller than seed cones and have a catkin-like structure. Pollen cones produce the pollen that is released to fertilize seed cones. Once the pollen has been shed, the pollen cone withers away and is no longer useful for identification purposes. In terms of the Junior Biologist project, you guys don't really need to know this. So I think I'm going to stop there. Oh, maybe I'll go down to this protective layers of bark, actually. So the bark on trees has 2 layers, an outer layer of dead wood and an inner layer of living tissues. The inner layer is made up of living cells that are continually dividing. The inner cells need water to live. They take in water through pores and lenticels. When the cells are deprived of water, they die and become part of the outer dead layer, which serves as an effective barrier against injuries and environmental stresses, kind of like our skin on our own bodies does. Since this layer consists of dead cells, it can no longer grow. It cracks or breaks away as the inner cells continue to grow and push the outer cells outward. So I won't read any more of the detail here because I think really we've covered what you need to know. So the main thing is that the form or shape of your tree is important. how the needles are arranged, whether they're in bundles of 2, 3, 5, or 1. And then also, what does the bark look like? You need to describe whether it's vertical or horizontal rings, or how is it smooth, is it rough, that kind of thing. So try to be as observant and detailed as you can be. Thanks so much, you guys.